Welcome everyone to today's Friday Focus talk, and apologies to anyone who joined 3 weeks ago when I was supposed to be doing this talk. I managed to have incredible IT issues and we had to postpone it. So thank you to anyone who's joined 3 weeks later to find out what I was going to talk about. It is indeed, as Stuart was saying, about a new display that we've got in the Kelvin Hall corridor on the subject of Scottish aluminium. But let me just share my screen and get that started. And Stern, if you can just give me a thumbs up and let me know that you can see that okay. Fabulous, brilliant. Okay. I will just share the correct screen. There we go. Right, here we go. This is what the display looks like. So you can come and see this whenever Kelvin Hall is open. So 7 days a week, and it's on until the 25th of August. So aluminium, it is a really important, but also in many respects, an almost forgotten part of Scotland's industrial heritage. And using material from the Scottish Business Archive here at the University of Glasgow, this display explores the story of the British Aluminium Company, its deep roots in Scotland, and also the historical links that the company has to the British Empire. So aluminium is often described as a metal that transformed the world, and that's very true. It's light, it's strong, it's extremely versatile, easily recyclable, and it's a good conductor of heat and electricity. This means that aluminium can be used for a huge variety of products, from drinks cans to saucepans, as you can see in one of the cases here, all the way through to trains and aeroplanes. So what do you think of when you hear the word aluminium? Well, all kinds of things, I'm sure. But because I've always liked aircraft since I was wee, I thought of this. Couldn't help but inject a Spitfire in there, because aluminium alloys were used for many parts of the famous Spitfire fighter aircraft from the Second World War, including the stress metal skin and the cylinders of their Merlin engines. And there's a Glasgow connection here as well, because Rolls-Royce and Hillington made Merlin engines for aircraft like Spitfires and Lancaster bombers during the Second World War. Now, although 60% of Britain's wartime aluminium supplies came from Canada, I'm sure that plenty of Scottish aluminium ended up in Spitfires. So the British Aluminium Company, known as British Aluminium, or just BA for short, was registered on the 5th of May, 1894. So we've only just passed the 130th anniversary of its foundation. And from the start, there were several University of Glasgow connections to the company. Lord Kelvin was British Aluminium's scientific advisor and later sat on its board of directors. He was one of the leading scientists of his day and professor of natural philosophy for over 50 years here at the university. And he was an enthusiastic supporter of the aluminium industry and its potential, in his view, to regenerate the Highlands and the communities that lived there. And 26th of June, 2024, that's the 200th anniversary of his birth coming up. You can find out more about Kelvin and his legacy at the Hunterian Museum. Also, the university is celebrating his life through a series of events throughout the year, and more details are on the Kelvin 200 web pages. And I've just got the web address, and that QR code will take you to that website as well. And we've got this great photo here showing Lord and Lady Kelvin, third and fourth from the left, on the 5th of September, 1895, during construction of the British Aluminium site at Foyers in the Highlands. Aluminium is the most abundant metal on Earth, but to be useful to us needs to be extracted and refined. Bauxite, 2 samples of which you can see on screen here, contains alumina, or aluminium oxide, and it takes 4 tons of bauxite to produce 2 tons of alumina powder, and 2 tons of alumina powder makes 1 ton of aluminium. And because of the very large quantities required to produce aluminium, bauxite mining can be pretty damaging to the environment. Just search online for bauxite mine images, you'll see what I mean, because deforestation and pollution are just 2 of the harmful consequences. And to begin with, BA sourced bauxite from Northern Ireland. However, before long, mines in the south of France became the company's main suppliers right up until the Second World War. And BA also looked further afield for bauxite to countries that were part of the British Empire. And we'll come to that a bit later in the talk. So the alumina powder from bauxite is converted into ingots of aluminium at a smelter. And the most successful conversion process was invented independently by two chemists at the same time in 1886. Charles Morton Hall in the USA, and on the other side of the Atlantic, Paul Louis Héroult in France. The Hall-Héroult method is still used today. And in a strange quirk of fate, both men were also born and died in the same years, 1863 and 1914. And this photo from, I guess, the early 1900s, possibly the late 19th century, shows workers at the Foyers smelter carrying ingots of aluminium. And here's another shot from Foyers many decades later, 1960s. And as you can see, vast quantities of ingots were continually being produced. But before the Hall-Héroult method made it possible to produce aluminium on an industrial scale, it was a rare and expensive metal. And this Metropolitan Police warrant badge dates from 1835, only 6 years after the service was founded in London. So it would have been a valuable object in its day. Now, a well-known story from the period when aluminium was rare, and one that you see mentioned quite often online, is that the French Emperor Napoleon III, who reigned between 1852 and 1870, allegedly ordered an aluminium dinner service to impress his best guests, and lesser guests had to make do with gold and silver services. But unfortunately, none of the aluminium items seem to have survived to this day, so there's still debate as to whether this tale is actually true or not. British Aluminium had sites across the UK and abroad, and in Scotland these included Greenock, Falkirk, Burntisland, Foyers, Kinlochleven and Lochaber. And there was also a short-lived plant at Invergordon between 1971 and 1981. And because of space restrictions in the Kelvin Hall display, but also because of relevant objects in the collection, we decided to focus on the three British aluminium smelters at Foyers, Kinlochleven and Lochaber in the case about Scotland and aluminium. Producing aluminium requires an enormous amount of energy, and BA built smelters in the Highlands because plentiful water supplies allowed the company to access cheap hydroelectric power. And BA began producing aluminium at Foyers on the banks of Loch Ness in 1896, and the nearby Falls of Foyers was used to provide the necessary hydroelectric power. Protesters condemned the building of a new village and smelter in an area of natural beauty, and those in favour argued that BA provided much needed support to an impoverished rural part of the country. And here we've got an early view of the furnace room at Foyers. Each of these furnaces is a carbon-lined steel bathtub full of molten cryolite heated to between 960 and 1000 degrees Celsius. Electricity is passed through them using carbon electrodes, separating aluminium from oxygen in the alumina powder, and the aluminium then falls to the bottom of the furnace from where it can be tapped. Aluminium medals were struck at all three smelters to commemorate the first lot or tap of the metal. And in this one from Foyers, dated June 1896, lists various sites relating to BA aluminium production. So we've got Cargan and Larne, their sources of bauxite in Northern Ireland. You've got Foyers, the smelter, and then Milton, which is north of Birmingham and was the site of a rolling mill, where the raw aluminium was sent to be shaped into finished sheets, plates, and that kind of thing. And on the other side, we've got a female figure holding aloft a torch surrounded by symbols of learning, science, and industry, with power lines and buildings in the background. Now, although Foyers was the first BA smelter to open, it was also the first to shut. So after 70 years of production, it closed in 1967. Facing stiff competition, it had become unprofitable and unable to compete with other aluminium producers in the UK and overseas. Construction at the British Aluminium plant in town at Kinlochleven was a far greater undertaking than at Foyers. Before BA arrived, there were only 2 hunting lodges and 4 houses in the area. Work started in 1904, and before long, the once quiet and remote head of Lochleven became a hive of industry. Because it was being built from the ground up, Kinlochleven was designed as a model community by the company, where everyday life and British Aluminium were completely integrated. And this view shows the works and the town from the pipeline that carried water the final part of the way from the Blackwater Dam to turbines in the powerhouse, which we can see here. These generated the electricity for the plant. And here's a great view that shows Kinlochleven from the other side of the valley. This and the other photos taken in the 1960s. You can clearly see just how big the site was, how close residential housing was to the smelter. And bear this nearness in mind, as I'll be talking about health and environmental impacts in the next slide. So here we've got workers in the furnace room at Kinlochleven doing a job known as breaking the crust, which formed around the base of furnaces. And this was to release gases. And it's a bit of a difficult photo to look at from a modern perspective, as the furnace room was a dangerous place to work. And by dangerous, I mean that ventilation or extraction was often poor. And as you can see here, the workers have no proper protection against the gases and the dust they were exposed to, many of which were carcinogenic. Not only were alumina and cryolite fumes in the atmosphere, but also carbon dust, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and fluorides, which cause bone deformities in people and animals. And lung, skin, and bladder cancers were common amongst workers in furnace rooms. So, although British Aluminium provided employee benefits such as housing and leisure facilities, for many decades it actively failed to address dangerous working conditions and toxic emissions that affected people, wildlife, and the landscape. And Kinlochleven was particularly vulnerable as it was in a valley, which trapped pollution between the mountains. And these health and environmental issues only seriously improved in the 1980s after a series of reforms. So another medal, Kinlochleven won, made from the first lot from 31st of December 1907, although mass production didn't actually begin until 1909. And then we've got an inscription in Gaelic on one side, which translates to, "What will water not make when it made me?" And by the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, 90% of British aluminium is being produced by smelters at Foyers and Kinlochleven. But as the decades wore on, Kinlochleven experienced a similar downfall to Foyers and finally shut in 2000, which was a devastating blow for a town originally built for one industrial purpose. And since then, Kinlochleven's focus has shifted to tourism, especially as it's part of the popular West Highland Way walking route. And this photo was taken earlier this year by Sam Dyer, part of the university's photographic unit, as he tramped across a part of the way. Now you can hopefully just see Kinlochleven in the distance in the middle of this shot. And Sam's also responsible for many of the images of the objects and the historical photographs from the university's Scottish Business Archive in this talk. So big thank you to him for these. During the First World War, demand for aluminium soared due to military uses for the metal, and BA had ambitious expansion plans, and in 1921, the company was granted permission to build a smelter at Lochaber, northeast of Fort William, and staff were housed in a new village in Verlochy. Production of aluminium began in 1929. Lochaber was expanded over the years until in 1958, British Aluminium was taken over by an American company, Reynolds Metals, who retained the BA name. However, 1982, British Aluminium was acquired by a much larger and wealthier Canadian competitor, Alcan, becoming British Alcan Limited. And British Alcan Limited was then in turn sold to investors in 1996. Now, Lochaber has so far managed to avoid the fate of Foyers and Kinlochleven. It's the last surviving aluminium smelter in the UK. And here's the furnace room at Lochaber, again a photo taken in the 1960s, with workers tapping molten aluminium. What I think is interesting in this shot is just to see how huge the space is and how relatively few people are required to work there. Operations ran continuously, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And to complete the trilogy of medals, here's one from Lochaber, produced from the first tap in 30th of December 1929. And again, we've got a Gaelic inscription, which translates to prosperity with the order and power of the universe. So back to the display. So the first case on the left there, well, that's the introduction. The second case was British Aluminium in Scotland. And then we decided to focus on British Aluminium's links to empire. Because from the very beginning of the company's existence, and like other British industries of the era, loyalty to country and empire was a core part of BA's ethos and key to the patriotic image that the company developed for itself. And to support these values, BA actively sought out senior staff with civil and military backgrounds in imperial service. BA acquired the exclusive British and colonial rights to the Harrow process of manufacturing aluminium in 1894, and it went on to invest heavily in various schemes. And one was the British and Colonial Bauxite Company. Founded in 1927, it established mining rights in British Guyana, present-day Guyana in South America, and Gold Coast, which is Ghana in Africa, which BA would go on to exploit. So although the first deposits of Gold Coast bauxite were found in 1915, large-scale mining only began in 1941, so during the Second World War. The colony rapidly became the most important source of bauxite for British aluminium companies, including BA. By 1945, over 40% of known deposits were in countries that were part of the British Empire, mostly in British Guyana, Gold Coast, and Jamaica, as well as India and Australia. Gold Coast became the independent country of Ghana in 1957, and bauxite is still one of its main exports, amid ongoing concerns about the threats mining poses to forest reserves and also the ecosystems they contain. And the photo here shows what bauxite mining looked like in the Gold Coast in the 1950s, with a power shovel loading bauxite onto lorries. The QR code takes you to a British aluminium film held at National Library of Scotland called Metal in Harmony. It's made in 1962. It is pure company propaganda, but it does show the complete journey of aluminium from bauxite mining in Ghana to smelters in Scotland through to finished aluminium. It's 28 minutes long and a really good watch, and you can view it online or visit NLS here in Kelvin Hall. And the sample of bauxite, which was illustrated in an earlier slide, and here again, well, this is from Gold Coast. It was displayed during the Empire Exhibition in Glasgow in 1938, before being transferred to the university by the Gold Coast Geological Society Survey Department. And just some of the items from the display that relate to Empire, all made of aluminium. So top left, we've got a medal, coronation of Edward VIII, 12th of May, 1937. However, Edward's reign only lasted between January and December 1936 before he abdicated. So this commemorative medal, as King and Emperor of India, was made in anticipation of a coronation that never actually took place. Instead, the same date was used for the coronation of George VI and Elizabeth, parents of the late Elizabeth II. Then we've got a couple of tokens. The Buy Empire Goods, top right, and bottom left, drink more cocoa. Imperial trade was absolutely vital to Britain's interests, and these advertising tokens made in the 1920s were given out at, for example, industrial exhibitions. And the Drink More Cocoa token on the bottom left shows the economic impact of British colonialism at first hand. And in pretty blunt terms, cocoa generated colossal sums of money, as did bauxite. But you've got to ask the questions, who actually benefited from the profits of these industries? Did the workers on the cocoa farms or bauxite mines see any benefits? And what were working conditions like there? And in the case of Ghana, so formerly Gold Coast, as I mentioned earlier, both bauxite but also cocoa have remained principal exports since the country's colonial period. Again, but with ongoing concerns about the industry's impact on the environment and also labor conditions. And then bottom right, the coin. Well, Britain was the first country to produce aluminium coins for general circulation, but not for domestic use. Instead, coins were designed for colonial territories in Africa. And the hole in the middle of this 1908 1/10 penny from British West Africa, present-day Nigeria, allowed coins to be carried on a length of string. But to save on production costs, the aluminium was diluted with other metals, and this caused the coins to corrode in hot, humid tropical climates. So the experiment was abandoned, leaving many locals out of pocket as a result. Now for me, this is one of the most interesting items in the display, and it's a cooking pot made in December 1897 at the School of Arts in Madras, India. And the inscription on the pot is in Tamil. You can see that on the left. Same pot, image on the right. The inscription is repeated in English on the other side. And it was made using aluminium from foyers. So the metal traveled a long way from the Highlands. And we've got a couple of names on the inscription. We know about Sir Alfred Chatterton. He was a professor of engineering in Madras, but also, interestingly, the maker is also mentioned. But who is he? Who is K. Gangadhara Bhuther? I mean, I think it's fantastic that they're mentioned at all. But we're looking into this. I have emailed the School of Arts, still awaiting a response, but hopefully I'll get one day, because it still exists and it's known as the Government College of Fine Arts in Chennai. Okay, well, that's the end of today's short presentation. But before I go, just like to say a huge thank you to everyone at the Hunterian who helped bring the display to life. Also to colleagues at the university's Archives and Special Collections, also National Library of Scotland and Glasgow Life. Thank you to Struan, and for everyone joining online today, happy to answer any questions that people may have.
Thanks, Jesper. That was really fascinating. We can now open the floor up, as Jesper said, to any questions that we have. If you do want to ask a question, just please unmute yourself, or if you prefer, you can type that into the chat box directly. I'll just get us started, just to get the ball rolling, because I can say, Jesper, you talked about planes and you talked about the aluminium cookpot, but do you have any particular objects that you really like in the display?
Why, Stern, I'm so glad you asked that question. Because yes, I do. I have something prepared, which is why I haven't stopped sharing. Not deliberate at all. Yeah, it's a spoon. I think this is one of the most unusual, it is an unusual object. It's not an ordinary spoon. It's a spoon made from aluminium from a wreckage of a crashed German Zeppelin or airship. And there wasn't a chance to tell this story properly in the display because of space restrictions, but I can here. And don't worry, for anyone trying to read the writing, there we go. That's the front and the back of the spoon. So, and yes, a wee postcard there as well. So Zeppelin LZ-4 was an experimental airship that was forced to land for repairs at Echterdingen in southern Germany on the 5th of August 1908. And apparently there was a crowd of tens and thousands there to watch the sight. But a gust of wind blew the Zeppelin from its moorings. And despite the efforts of the people on the ground holding the mooring ropes, and to be honest, depending on what source you read, one or two technicians on board, the LZ-4 collided with trees and then immediately burst into flames. And as you can quite vividly see here, it was completely destroyed. But unbelievably, there were no casualties. So fortunately, this is nothing like the Hindenburg crash of 1937, the very famous one, which you've probably seen photos of. Now, you might think that crashes like this, especially in the early days, 1908, might have dented public support for Zeppelins, but on the contrary, money flooded in for further research and development, and spoons like this were made from the wreckage to raise funds. So for those of you who can't read German, on the left there, we've got in memory of 5th of August 1908, and then on the right, from the remains of Zeppelin 4. So pretty simple inscription. And at some point, this spoon made it into the British Aluminium Company archive, which then became the Alcan archive in 1982. And that was transferred to the University of Glasgow in the mid-1990s. And now it's in a display case. And so I'll stop sharing now. There we go.
That's smashing, Jesper. I just see we've got a question here from Giovanna asking, to your knowledge, has there been any archaeological investigation of the industrial sites such as Lochaber, what remains, and has there been any community work around memory?
Yes, Giovanna. I think is the basic answer. Yeah, I mean, there's they're listed on Canmore website, for example, and I know that there's been work done on it. There's plenty of local community interest and has been over the years. When I visited Kinloch even quite a long time ago, there was a display on the industry there. I'm not sure if there still is, hopefully. But because there's a lot to talk about.
Super, yes, but I'm just seeing here from Anna Natalio that the spoons are very cool. Are there environmentally and socially responsible mining processes for bauxite being used?
Well, certainly if you look at, as part of the research for this, I went onto various websites of various modern companies that produce aluminium and mine bauxite. But of course, they give you a very favorable and positive point of view. The way that bauxite is mined these days, the way that aluminium is produced, is obviously light years away from what we saw in the talk today. As for being environmentally and socially responsible, I mean, I think my personal view is probably there's still plenty of questions to be asked about that. Can mine, especially with mining in general, I think if you're going down a mining route, it's always going to be environmentally destructive in one way, shape, or form, no matter how you spin it.
It's a very somber thought to end on, but thanks for a marvelous talk, Jesper. That was really interesting. I especially enjoyed the bit about the Zeppelin. That was a real highlight for
Why?
me.
Thank you very much.
Who doesn't love Zeppelins? Well, I think that's all the questions we've had. And that just leaves me to say thank you very much to Jesper for coming along, giving us such a wonderful talk. And I can remind you all that there'll be another talk next Friday, and you can find more information about that on our website and on the Eventbrite page attached to it. We look forward to seeing you all there if you'd like to come along. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming along, and I hope you have a very nice day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.